The darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions. Minho pressed his face against the cold glass of the viewport and stared at the massive shape floating before him. His breath fogged the glass as his heart pounded in his chest. "What is that thing?" Bogum whispered from behind him. The younger scavenger clutched his scanner with trembling hands. Minho had been salvaging wrecks for 12 years. He had seen Vryn warships torn apart by combat. He had walked through the broken remains of Keltar trading vessels. He had even explored the ancient shells of pre-Accord colony ships. But this was different. This was something else entirely. The vessel was enormous. It stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, its hull dark and scarred by time. Unlike the smooth, elegant curves of Vryn design or the crystalline structures favored by the Keltar, this ship was brutal, angular. Every line seemed designed for purpose rather than beauty. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of some ancient predator. "I don't know," Minho admitted. "But whatever it is, it's old. Really old." Their small salvage ship, the Morning Prophet, moved closer. The massive derelict blocked out the stars behind it. Minho could see strange symbols etched along the hull. They were unlike any language in the Celestial Accord's databases. "Should we call this in?" Bogum asked nervously. Minho considered it. By law, they were supposed to report any unknown vessels to the Accord authorities. But laws didn't pay for fuel or food. This find could set them up for life if they could claim salvage rights first. "Not yet," Minho decided. "First, we see if there's anything worth claiming." They suited up and crossed the void between ships. Minho's magnetic boots clanked against the strange hull. The metal felt different beneath his feet. Heavier somehow. Denser. He ran his gloved hand along the surface and found it surprisingly intact despite obvious age. The symbols were everywhere. Sharp, angular letters that seemed to slash across the hull like wounds. Minho took pictures of everything. Even if they couldn't salvage the ship itself, these markings might be valuable to scholars. Finding an entry point took 2 hours. The airlocks were designed differently than any Minho had seen. Thicker, more heavily armored. Bogum worked on the manual override while Minho kept watch. Though for what? He couldn't say. They were alone out here. Far beyond the mapped territories of the Outer Rim, the airlock finally groaned open with a hiss of stale air that had been trapped for who knew how long. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness inside. The corridor beyond was wide enough for 4 Vryn to walk side by side. The walls were lined with more of those strange symbols. But what caught Minho's attention were the pictures. Faded images showed bipedal creatures in various poses. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and faces that were almost Vryn-like but flatter, less elegant, more aggressive. "What are those?" Bogum breathed. "The crew, maybe." Minho moved deeper into the ship. Or the builders. Every room they explored added to the mystery. The furniture was sized for creatures roughly the same height as Vryn. The control panels were covered in those sharp symbols. And everywhere, there were weapons. Small arms lockers in every corridor. Larger weapons mounted at key junctions. This ship had been designed by people who expected to fight. They reached what appeared to be a command center. Large chairs faced screens that had long since gone dark. Minho approached the central console carefully. His translator struggled with the symbols but managed to identify a few words. Terra appeared multiple times. So did Earth, and something his translator rendered as United Nations Space Command. "Bogum, are you recording all this?" Minho asked. "Every second," the younger scavenger confirmed. "But Minho, I don't like this place. It feels wrong. Like we're walking through a tomb." Minho couldn't argue. There was something oppressive about the ship. Something that whispered of violence and death. But they had come too far to leave empty-handed. He found a data core in what appeared to be the captain's ready room. It was surprisingly intact, sealed in a protective case. Minho carefully extracted it and loaded it into his pack. This alone could be priceless. Ancient data always fetched good prices from the right collectors. That was when Bogum touched the wrong panel. The ship came alive. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in red. A deep thrumming sound filled the corridors as ancient power systems stirred from their long sleep. Minho grabbed Bogum and pulled him away from the console. "What did you do?" Minho shouted. "I don't know. I just touched it." Alarms wailed. The symbols on every screen began scrolling rapidly. And then, cutting through the chaos, a sound that made Minho's blood run cold. A voice, mechanical and emotionless, speaking in that unknown language. Their translators struggled, catching only fragments. Distress. Beacon. Activated. Broadcasting. Coordinates. Awaiting. Rescue. We need to leave. Now. Minho grabbed Bogum's arm and dragged him back toward the airlock. They ran through the corridors as the ancient ship continued to wake around them. Systems that had slept for millennia were coming online, one by one. Minho could hear something huge, moving deep within the vessel. Machinery grinding and whirring. They burst through the airlock and practically flew back to the Morning Prophet. Minho didn't breathe properly until they had put several thousand kilometers between themselves and the derelict. Bogum was shaking. "What was that? What did we wake up?" Minho pulled out the data core and held it up to the light. "I don't know. But someone needs to know about this. Someone important." 3 days later, they arrived at the nearest Accord station. Minho went straight to the authorities. At first, they didn't believe him. Then he showed them the data core and the images. Within hours, he was sitting across from Ambassador Day, a senior diplomat known for his interest in ancient history. Day studied the symbols with growing excitement. His slender Vrin fingers traced the sharp letters on Minho's datapad. "Where did you find this?" Day demanded. Minho provided the coordinates. Day immediately began searching through databases, his 3 eyes wide with wonder. "These symbols," Day whispered, "I've seen them before. In forbidden archives. In legends that the Accord tried to erase." He looked up at Minho, with something like fear in his eyes. "Do you know what you've found? A derelict ship?" "No." Day's voice was barely audible. "You've found proof. Proof that the stories are true. These symbols spell UNSC Infinite Horizon. And if I'm right about what that means..." He trailed off, his skin paling to a lighter blue. "What does it mean?" Minho pressed. Day looked at him with haunted eyes. "It means humans are real, and if that ship is broadcasting a distress beacon, it means someone might answer it." Across the galaxy, the signal traveled through the void. It passed dead stars and empty worlds. It crossed the Great Quarantine Zone that had been maintained for 3,000 years. And finally, it reached the Sol system. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in bunkers that had waited for centuries, red lights began to flash. Generals who had never expected to serve in wartime stirred from their long vigil. Soldiers began to wake from their suspended sleep. And in orbit around a blue-green world called Earth, massive shipyards that had remained dark for generations roared back to life. Humanity had heard the call, and humanity was coming home. 6 months had passed since the beacon activated. Commander Hana stood on the bridge of the warship Times Eternal Dawn Times and watched the tactical display with growing concern. 3 more ships had vanished near the quarantine zone in the past week. No distress calls, no debris fields, just empty space where vessels should have been. "Any updates from the search teams?" she asked her tactical officer. "Nothing, Commander. It's like they disappeared completely." Gring. 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 Hana's mandibles clicked softly in thought. The quarantine zone had been maintained for over 3,000 years. No one went there. Nothing came out. It surrounded a small yellow star that ancient records simply labeled as Forbidden System 01. The reasons for the quarantine had been lost to time. buried in archives that even senior diplomats couldn't access. But something had changed. And Hana didn't believe in coincidences. On the science deck, Jisoo hunched over her workstation. The young researcher had been studying the data core that Scavenger had recovered. The symbols had been maddeningly difficult to translate. The language had no connection to any known Accord tongue. It was as if it had evolved completely independently, but slowly, painfully, she was making progress. Human, she whispered, reading the translation on her screen. They called themselves human. The word meant nothing to her. She searched the public databases and found only vague references. Ancient myths spoke of a violent species that destroyed themselves in a great war. Children's stories mentioned creatures that lived in the dark spaces between stars, but nothing concrete, nothing real. Jisoo dove deeper, accessing restricted academic archives. There, buried in forgotten research papers, she found references to archaeological anomalies, artifacts that didn't match known civilizations, energy signatures that predated the Accord itself, and always, the same symbols that covered the derelict ship. She requested access to higher-level archives. Her request was denied. She tried again, citing her research credentials. Denied again. Someone didn't want this information spreading. That made her more determined. Meanwhile, Captain Hyun prepared his ship for departure. The Times, First Light Times, was a contact vessel, designed for peaceful exploration and diplomatic missions. His orders were clear. Approach the quarantine zone. Investigate the disappearances. Report back. Do not engage. Do not cross the boundary. Sir, are you sure about this? His first officer asked. No one's gone near that system in 3 millennia. Which is exactly why we need to investigate, Hyun replied calmly. Fear only grows in darkness. We need answers. The journey took 3 weeks. As they approached the quarantine boundary, Hyun's crew grew increasingly nervous. The space beyond was eerily empty. No asteroid fields. No gas clouds. Just void, as if something had cleared everything away. Sensors? Hyun prompted. I'm picking up something. Multiple somethings. Large objects. The sensor officer's voice wavered. Sir, there are ships out there. Lots of them. How many? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They're holding position just inside the boundary. Hyun's blood ran cold. Can you identify their design? Negative. Nothing in our databases. But sir, they're all oriented toward us. They know we're here. On one of those distant ships, Taejin stood in the Combat Information Center and studied the alien vessel on his screen. It was sleek and graceful. Nothing like the brutal efficiency of human warships. The crew had been tracking it since it entered sensor range. Should we hail them, Colonel? The communications officer asked. Taejin's jaw tightened. 3,000 years. 3,000 years since the galaxy had abandoned humanity. They had begged for help during the Civil War. They had sent countless messages into the void, pleading for the Accord to return. All they received was silence. And now, when humanity had finally clawed its way back from the brink, when they had rebuilt their fleets and healed their world, the aliens came knocking. No, Taejin said coldly. Battle stations. If they cross the boundary, we engage. Back on the Times First Light asterisk, Hyun made a decision. Against protocols and common sense, he ordered his ship forward. They had to know what waited in that system. The moment they crossed the invisible line, everything changed. Alarms screamed. Dozens of ships broke from their holding positions and surged toward them. They moved with predatory precision, surrounding the Times, First Light Times, in seconds. Shields up, evasive maneuvers. Hyun ordered. Sir, they're targeting our weapons systems. The first shot came without warning. It wasn't designed to destroy, but to disable. The Times First Light Times rocked as its main cannon exploded. Return fire, Hyun shouted, but it was useless. The attackers moved too fast. anticipated every maneuver. In less than 5 minutes, the Times, first light times, was crippled, drifting helplessly. Then they boarded. The docking port exploded inward. Armored figures stormed through the breach, moving with military precision. Hyun got his first clear look at them, and his hearts nearly stopped. They were bipedal, roughly Vrin height. But instead of elegant frames and multiple eyes, they had thick builds and faces dominated by forward-facing eyes that seemed to burn with intensity. Their armor was heavy and scarred, covered in those same angular symbols from the derelict ship. One of them, clearly the leader, approached Hyun. The creature removed its helmet, revealing a face that was shockingly expressive. Anger, suspicion, and something that might have been pain all flashed across those strange features. The creature spoke. Its translator struggled, then produced words in the Accord common language. "Why are you here? Why are you here?" Hyun forced himself to stay calm. "We came to investigate disappearances near this system. We mean no harm." Unquote. The creature's laugh was bitter. "No harm? Your people meant no harm 3,000 years ago either. You just left us to die." "I don't understand," Hyun said honestly. "What people? Who are you?" "We are human," Taejin said, and the word carried the weight of ancient grief. "We are the ones you abandoned." The news spread across the Accord like wildfire. Humanity wasn't a myth. They were real, alive, and furious. The Times' first light times crew was eventually released, but the message was clear. Approach the Sol system again, and there would be war. Commander Hana was promoted to admiral and given command of the defensive fleets. She studied every report, every image, every scrap of data about these humans. They were technologically inferior to the Accord. Their ships were crude, their weapons less sophisticated, but they had something the Accord had lost long ago. They had been forged in fire and loss. They had survived their own extinction and crawled back from the abyss. And that made them dangerous. In a hospital station far from the front lines, the sole survivor of one of the disappeared ships finally regained consciousness. Her name was Young-hee, and her testimony horrified everyone who heard it. "They came out of nowhere," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Our sensors didn't pick them up until they were on top of us. They moved so fast, so coordinated." She clutched the blanket tighter. "What did they look like?" the interrogator asked, gently. "Monsters," Young-hee breathed. "But organized monsters. They swept through the ship like they'd done it 1,000 times before. They took prisoners. They took our data cores, and then they left, taking our entire crew with them." "Did they hurt anyone?" Young-hee's eyes filled with tears. "Only those who fought back. The rest, they just took them. I don't know where. I don't know why." But Admiral Hana knew why. Intelligence reports were coming in from multiple sources. The humans were interrogating prisoners, learning about the current state of the Accord, gathering information for war. On Earth, President Minseo addressed the assembly of survivors. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from every remaining human nation. Mars sent delegates. So did the Belt colonies and the outer settlements. "We face a choice," Minseo said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "For 3,000 years, we believed we were alone. We thought the galaxy had forgotten us, or worse, abandoned us deliberately. Now we know the truth. The Celestial Accord still exists. Thrives, even." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "They sent a ship into our territory," Minseo continued. "A small ship on a scouting mission. Some call for immediate retaliation, to strike first and remind the galaxy why they feared us." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "But others counsel patience. They say we should attempt communication, seek answers, before seeking blood." Taejin stood and spoke without permission. "They left us to die, Madam President. while we tore ourselves apart in civil war, while billions died. They sat safely behind their quarantine and did nothing. Now they come sniffing around our borders, and we're supposed to ask nicely why they abandoned us? The assembly erupted in shouts of agreement and opposition. Mincio let them argue for several minutes before raising her hand for silence. Colonel Tajan speaks from pain we all share, she said quietly. But I would know the truth before we paint the stars red. I would know why they left us. I would know if they even remember what they did. Her eyes hardened. And then, if their answers displease me, then we will show them what humanity has become. We will remind them that we do not forgive, and we do not forget. The vote was close, but peace won by the slimmest margin. Humanity would prepare for war while attempting one final communication. They would send a message to the Accord, demanding answers and recognition. The message was simple. We are human. We survived. Why did you leave us to die? Respond within 30 days, or face the consequences. When the message reached Accord High Command, panic followed. Historians scrambled to find any records of humanity and what had happened 3,000 years ago. Most files were sealed or missing. The few that remained painted a disturbing picture. Ambassador Day worked day and night, piecing together fragments of truth. What he discovered shook him to his core. The quarantine wasn't about protecting the Accord from humanity. It was about erasing them, making them disappear from history. And the reason why was worse than anyone imagined. The 30 days were almost up. Across the galaxy, both sides prepared for what seemed inevitable. Ships moved into position. Armies mobilized. Civilians were evacuated from border worlds. In her quarters, Admiral Hana read Day's preliminary report and felt her world crumble. If what he suggested was true, the Accord had committed a crime so monstrous that no amount of time could wash it clean. The humans weren't myths. They were victims. And now, they were coming for justice. The 30 days passed without a response from the Accord. In the command center on Mars, President Minseo stood before the military council with a heavy heart. She had hoped for answers, for dialogue, for anything but silence. They've chosen to ignore us, Colonel Tajan said flatly. Just like before, Minseo couldn't argue. The silence spoke volumes. After 3,000 years, the Accord still didn't consider humanity worth acknowledging. That truth hurt more than any weapon. Begin Operation Homecoming, she ordered quietly. Show them we will not be ignored again. The human fleet emerged from the Sol system like a swarm of angry hornets. 200 warships, each carrying the scars and lessons of humanity's darkest days. They weren't as advanced as Accord vessels. Their shields were weaker. Their weapons had less range, but they were crewed by people who had nothing left to lose. Admiral Hana watched the human fleet approach the Outer Rim territories on her tactical display. Her own fleet outnumbered them 2-1. Her ships were superior in every measurable way. But as she studied their formation, cold dread settled in her stomach. They weren't advancing like explorers or diplomats. They were advancing like soldiers who had already accepted death. All ships, defensive positions, Hana commanded. Do not fire unless fired upon. This is still a misunderstanding. We can still. The human fleet opened fire. It wasn't precision strikes or warning shots. It was overwhelming, brutal violence. Thousands of missiles streaked across the void. Railgun rounds followed, moving at a significant fraction of light speed. Energy weapons lashed out like solar flares. The Accord fleet's shields absorbed most of the initial barrage. But then the humans did something unexpected. They kept coming, closing the distance at suicidal speeds. They're going to ram us, Hana's tactical officer shouted. Evasive maneuvers, return fire. But the humans weren't suicidal. At the last moment, small attack craft deployed from the larger ships. They were tiny, barely larger than fighters, but they moved with incredible agility. They swarmed the Accord ships, targeting specific weak points with precision that came from deep understanding of combat. One of Hana's cruisers lost power. Another reported hull breaches. A third went completely dark as its systems were systematically destroyed. The humans weren't trying to destroy the fleet. They were trying to cripple it, to capture it. "Fall back," Hana ordered. But falling back meant abandoning 3 damaged vessels to the enemy. Hana watched helplessly as human soldiers boarded those ships. The crew fought back, but the humans moved through the corridors with terrifying efficiency. Within 2 hours, the human fleet had secured 3 Accord warships and dozens of prisoners. They withdrew to a safe distance, their prize ships in tow. The message was clear. Humanity could hurt the Accord, and they were just getting started. News of the battle reached the Accord capital within hours. The council convened in emergency session. Panic competed with outrage among the representatives. "We must respond with overwhelming force," the Keltar representative demanded. "Show these primitives what happens when they attack civilized society." "They're not primitives," Ambassador Day said quietly. "They're survivors of something we did to them. We need to understand what that was before we make this worse." "Worse? They attacked us. They took our ships and our people. After we ignored their message for 30 days, Day countered. After we quarantined them for 3 millennia. We owe them answers." The argument raged for hours. Finally, the council voted to authorize military action. Not to destroy humanity, but to contain them. To push them back to their system and reinforce the quarantine. It was exactly the wrong decision. Colonel Tajin stood on the bridge of the captured Accord cruiser and allowed himself a cold smile. The ship's systems were more advanced than human technology, but the principles were the same. His engineers were already learning to operate it. "Status?" he asked. "Weapons online. Shields at 60%. We can fight," his second-in-command reported. "Good. Because they're coming." The second wave of human attacks hit border colonies with calculated brutality. They didn't target civilians, but they made no effort to minimize collateral damage either. Power stations exploded. Communications arrays went dark. Orbital defense platforms were systematically destroyed. On the colony world of Tarim, the inhabitants watched in horror as human ships descended through the atmosphere. They expected bombardment. They expected death. Instead, soldiers emerged and occupied the government center. Within hours, they had the colony's leadership assembled in the main square. Tajin himself walked among them, his armor scorched from recent combat. He removed his helmet and looked at the terrified aliens with cold eyes. "I am Colonel Tajin of the United Nations Space Command," he said through his translator. "We have taken control of this colony. No one will be harmed if you cooperate." "What do you want?" the colony administrator asked, her voice trembling. "Answers," Tajin replied. 3,000 years ago, humanity fought a civil war. We sent messages to the Accord, begging for help, for mediation, for anything. We were ignored. Our civilization nearly died. Billions perished. Why? I don't know. That was before my time. Before any of our times. Tajin's expression hardened. "Then you'll help us find someone who does know. Your records. Your archives. Everything you have about the quarantine. About why you abandoned us." The search of Tayarim's archives took 3 days. What the humans found enraged them further. There were no records of humanity's pleas for help. No documentation of the decision to quarantine them. It was as if someone had deliberately erased everything. But they did find something else. References to the human problem in old military dispatches. Mentions of containment protocols in ancient council minutes. And a single line that made Tajin's blood boil. Solution confirmed. Historical revision proceeding as planned. They had been erased, Deliberately, systematically, Tajin released the colonists unharmed, but took copies of every archive on the planet. Then he burned the government center to the ground as a warning. Humanity would not be erased again. Admiral Hana, promoted to general, found herself commanding a war she didn't understand. Every engagement followed the same pattern. Human forces would strike hard and fast, capture what they could, and withdraw before reinforcements arrived. They were conducting raids, not trying to hold territory. "They're looking for something," her intelligence officer suggested during a briefing. "What?" "Information. Every colony they hit, they strip the archives clean. They're not interested in conquest. They want to know what happened to them." Hana pulled up the reports from the captured colonies. The pattern was clear. The humans were conducting archaeological warfare, digging through history to find the truth the Accord had buried. "Get me Ambassador Day," she ordered, "and find out what he's learned about the quarantine. If the humans are willing to go to war for answers, maybe we should give them those answers before more blood is spilled." But it was already too late for easy solutions. On the frontier world of Urim, the Accord made its stand. An entire battle group, 20 ships strong, moved to intercept a human raiding force. The engagement was fierce and personal. The human commander, a woman named Minji, led her forces with grim determination. She had lost her entire family during the Civil War, had watched her world burn while the stars remained silent. Every shot she fired carried 3,000 years of rage. The Accord forces fought bravely, but they were fighting for duty. The humans were fighting for something deeper. For recognition. For justice. For the right to exist, without being erased from history. When the battle ended, both sides had taken heavy casualties. The human fleet limped away with their prize. Urim's central data repository, containing records going back 4,000 years. Among the survivors on the Accord side was a young soldier named Suman. She had been a medic, helping wounded on both sides during the chaos. She had seen human soldiers spare Accord crew who surrendered, had watched them provide medical care to prisoners, had heard them weeping over their own dead while showing respect for the Accord fallen. These weren't monsters. They were people. People who had been deeply, terribly wronged. When Suman returned to base, she requested an emergency meeting with General Hana. What she reported shook Hana to her core. "They're not trying to destroy us," Suman said. "They're trying to force us to see them, to acknowledge what was done to them. General, I think if we just talk to them." "The Council has forbidden negotiations until they cease hostilities," Hana interrupted. "Then the Council is condemning both sides to a war nobody needs." Suman's voice broke. "I saw human soldiers crying over dead friends, singing songs of mourning in their strange language. They're just like us. They hurt. They grieve. They don't want this war any more than we do." Hana was silent for a long moment. Then she made a decision that could cost her everything. "Find me a back channel to the humans," she ordered quietly. "Unofficial. Deniable. I want to talk to someone on their side who might listen to reason. That could be considered treason, General." "I know. Do it anyway." Across the void, war correspondent Sora broadcasted images of the conflict to every corner of the Accord. Her reports showed the ferocity of human attacks, the brutality of their tactics, but they also showed something else. The desperation in every human action. The way they fought like cornered animals with nothing to lose. Her most powerful broadcast came from Tehrim. She showed the burned government center, interviewed colonists who had met the humans face to face, and she showed something else. Graffiti the humans had left behind. In crude but readable Accord script, someone had written, "We were here. We are real. Remember us." Those words went viral across Accord space. People began asking questions. What had humanity done to deserve quarantine? Why had they been forgotten? What right did the Accord have to erase an entire species from existence? Public opinion began to shift. Not enough to end the war, but enough to make people uncomfortable with the official narrative. In his hidden laboratory, Ambassador Day finally broke through the security protocols protecting the oldest archives. What he found confirmed his worst fears and validated every human grievance. The truth was worse than abandonment. It was genocide by neglect. And the people responsible had built the modern accord on the ashes of humanity's near extinction. He encrypted everything he found and sent it to General Hana with a simple message. This cannot stand. Whatever the cost, the truth must be revealed. The war entered its third month. Dozens of worlds had been raided. Hundreds were dead on both sides. Thousands more were wounded or missing. And still, the Accord refused to negotiate. In the Sol system, President Minseo received reports of increasing Accord military buildup. They were preparing a major offensive, a final push to drive humanity back and reinforce the quarantine. We can't win a prolonged war, her military advisor said bluntly. Our industrial base is smaller. Our population is smaller. If they come at us with everything they have, we'll be crushed. Then we make them pay a price too high to accept, Taejin said coldly. We show them that beating us will cost them so dearly that victory becomes meaningless. Minseo looked at the battle plans, at the casualty projections, at the future that was rushing toward them all. There has to be another way, she whispered. There isn't, Taejin replied. They've made their choice. Now we make ours. We survive, or we die fighting. The pieces were in motion. Both sides prepared for the conflict that would determine humanity's fate. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, General Hana prepared to commit an act that might save both species or destroy her completely. She was going to tell humanity the truth. The secret meeting took place on a dead moon, orbiting a gas giant nobody cared about. General Hana arrived in a small, unmarked shuttle with only 2 guards. She had told no one about this meeting except Ambassador Day, who had arranged it. On the opposite side of the crater, a human shuttle landed. A woman emerged, her armor bearing the insignia of a captain. Her face was weathered and scarred, her eyes carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Her name was Minji, and she had lost everything 3,000 years ago. You must be General Hana, Minji said through her translator. Her hand rested on her sidearm, not threatening but ready. And you are the one who burned the government center on Tarim, Hana replied calmly. I did. I'd do it again. Minji took a step closer. Are you here to apologize? To negotiate? Or to waste my time? I'm here to give you what you've been searching for, Hana said. The truth. She pulled out a data crystal and held it up. Everything Ambassador Day uncovered. Everything the Accord tried to hide. The reason for the quarantine. The reason for your suffering. All of it. Minji stared at the crystal with hungry eyes. Why? Why would you give this to us? Because soldiers shouldn't die for lies, Hana said quietly. Because my people are marching to war without understanding what they're fighting for. And because what was done to humanity was unforgivable. If we're going to fight, it should at least be with the truth between us. Minji took the crystal carefully, as if it might explode. What's on here? 4,000 years ago, there was a war, Hana began. Not the civil war that nearly destroyed your species. An older war. The Keltar Empire was expanding aggressively, conquering and enslaving weaker species. Most of the galaxy stood by and watched, because the Keltar were powerful and nobody wanted to fight them. But humanity did, Minji guessed. Yes. Humanity was younger then, newer to space travel. But when you encountered the species being enslaved, you intervened. You fought the Keltar Empire and several other aggressive powers. You lost millions of soldiers defending species you barely knew. Hana's voice grew softer. You won. You broke the empires and freed the enslaved. But the powerful species you defeated never forgave you. They viewed humanity as dangerously unpredictable, too willing to fight, too willing to die for principles. So they punished us for doing the right thing, Minji said bitterly. Not immediately. First, they made peace. They joined with humanity and the freed species to form the Celestial Accord. Everyone was equals. Everyone had a voice. Hana paused. But then your civil war started. We remember that, Minji said. Colonies fought the home system. Brother fought brother. It was hell. You sent messages asking the Accord for mediation, for help stopping the violence. The records show hundreds of pleas for assistance. Hana's voice turned cold. They were all received. And they were all ignored. Why? Because certain council members saw an opportunity. If humanity destroyed itself, the problem would be solved. No more unpredictable humans starting wars over moral principles. No more young species challenging the old powers. Hana met Minji's eyes. They quarantined your system. Told everyone it was for safety. To contain the conflict. But really, they were letting you die. Minji's hands trembled. We sent children. Our last colony ships full of children, begging for sanctuary. We broadcast on every channel. We did everything but beg on our knees. I know. It's all in the records. Every message. Every plea. All ignored. Hana looked away. When the Civil War ended, and you survived, the Council panicked. They had tried to erase you through inaction. They couldn't admit that. So they did the next best thing. They erased you from history. One. How? Records were sealed or destroyed. Children were taught that humanity was just a myth. A cautionary tale about species that destroy themselves. Within a few generations, no one remembered the truth. No one except a few archivists and historians who kept the sealed records. Hana gestured to the crystal. Like Ambassador Day, Minji looked at the small crystal in her hand. All that pain, all that betrayal, compressed into a tiny piece of technology. What species voted for the quarantine? She asked quietly. The Keltar led the vote, but the Vryn, my people, supported it, along with 3 others. Hana's voice was heavy with shame. The freed species you saved voted against it, but they were outvoted. So the people we died for tried to save us. And the people we defeated condemned us. Minji laughed bitterly. There's poetry in that. Terrible poetry. What will you do with this information? I don't know. Part of me wants to burn every Keltar and Vryn world to ash. Watch them suffer as we suffered. Minji looked up at the stars. But another part of me is just tired. So tired of fighting. Of losing people. Of being angry all the time. I'm tired too, Hana admitted. I'm tired of this war. Of watching soldiers die for decisions made before they were born. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 soldiers from opposite sides sharing a moment of exhausted honesty. There's more on the crystal, Hana said. Plans for the Accord's next offensive. Troop movements. Fleet positions. Everything you'd need to defeat us. Minji's eyes widened. You're giving us military intelligence? That's treason. Yes. But I'd rather be a traitor than watch both our species bleed for a lie. Hana turned back toward her shuttle. Do with it what you will. But know this. There are many in the Accord who never wanted this war. Who are horrified by what was done to humanity. We're not all your enemies. General, Minji called out. Hana stopped. Because I have children, and I don't want them growing up in a galaxy where we solved our problems by forgetting the victims existed. We have to be better than that. Both of our species have to be better. Minji watched the Vryn General's shuttle lift off and disappear into the black. Then she looked down at the crystal in her hand. This small thing contained the power to end the war or escalate it beyond all reason. She returned to her ship and immediately sent the data to President Mincio and the military council. Within hours, the entire human command structure had access to the truth. The reaction was explosive. Some, like Colonel Tajin, called for immediate retaliation. We have their fleet positions. We could strike now. Cripple their offensive before it launches. Make them pay for every year we suffered. Others, like Dr. Ji-hoon, a historian who had dedicated his life to preserving humanity's memory, urged caution. If we release this to the Accord public, we turn their own people against their government. We expose the lie. Without firing another shot, President Minseo listened to hours of debate. She watched her council nearly tear itself apart over how to respond. Finally, she made her decision. We release everything. Every record. Every message we sent begging for help. Every vote that condemned us. We broadcast it on every channel. In every language. We make it impossible for the Accord to ignore us again. That won't stop their military offensive, Taejin objected. No. But it might stop the second one. Or the third. We need the Accord's people to know what their leaders did. Let them decide if they want to keep fighting for a lie. The broadcast went out simultaneously across Accord space. Thousands of communication arrays carried the message. It was simple and devastating. We are humanity. This is what was done to us. This is why we fight. Then came the records. Actual footage from 3,000 years ago. Human colonies burning. Children crying in refugee ships. Messages to the Accord, time-stamped and authenticated, begging for help. And then, the Council votes. The deliberate decision to let humanity die. The Accord exploded in controversy. On the capital world, riots broke out. Citizens demanded answers from their government. How could they not know? How could this have been hidden for so long? What other lies were buried in sealed archives? The council convened in emergency session. They tried to deny it. Called it propaganda. But Ambassador Day stood before them with more proof. Documents, bearing the seals of long-dead counselors. Audio recordings of debates about the human problem. Every word is true, Day said simply. We are guilty. Our predecessors committed a crime against an entire species, and we have perpetuated that crime through silence and erasure. The Keltar representative tried to argue. That was a different time. Different leaders. We can't be held responsible for. We maintained the quarantine. Day interrupted. We kept humanity locked away. We forgot them deliberately. The crime continued every day for 3,000 years. The vote was called. Should the Accord formally acknowledge the crime and open negotiations with humanity? It failed. Not by much, but it failed. The old powers, led by the Keltar, argued that admitting guilt would open them to reparations and demands they couldn't meet. Better to finish the war. To push humanity back to their system and reinforce the quarantine. To bury this embarrassment once and for all. When the vote results were announced, something broke in the Accord. Not physically, but spiritually. Half the population believed their government had committed atrocity. The other half believed humanity was manipulating them with propaganda. The fracture ran deep. On the military side, the split was even more dramatic. Suman, the medic who had shown compassion to human prisoners, stood up in her unit's briefing and announced she was deserting. I won't fight for this, she said simply. I won't kill people who were wronged by my government. Court-martial me if you want. But I'm done. She expected to be arrested immediately. Instead, a dozen others stood with her. Then 2 dozen. Before the day was out, entire units were refusing orders. General Hana watched her forces fracture and felt a strange mix of pride and despair. Pride that her people could recognize injustice. Despair that it was tearing apart everything she'd spent her life defending. Colonel Taejin received the news of the Accord's vote with cold fury. They had been given the truth and still chose to fight. Still refused to acknowledge what they'd done. Prepare for Operation Reckoning, he ordered. If they won't give us justice, we'll take it. But President Minseo overruled him. No. We've shown them the truth. Now, we wait. Wait for what? For them to gather their forces and destroy us? Wait for the Accord to tear itself apart, Minseo said calmly. We're not fighting a united enemy anymore. Half of them don't want this war. We just need to give that half time to make their voices heard. Taejin wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. The videos from Accord Worlds showed massive protests. Soldiers refusing orders. Politicians demanding peace. The Accord was eating itself from within. But wars have momentum. The Accord's offensive fleet was already assembled. Contracts had been signed. Orders had been given. Even though many no longer believed in the cause, the machine of war continued to move forward. General Hana stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the massive fleet she commanded. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of soldiers, all prepared to attack the Sol system and end humanity's rebellion once and for all. General, we have our orders, her tactical officer said quietly. When do we advance? General. Hana looked at the tactical display showing Earth and its sister worlds, showing the human fleet assembled to defend their home, showing the place where millions would die fighting over crimes committed before most of them were born. She thought of her children, of Suman's courage, of General Minji's exhausted eyes on that dead moon. I need to make a call, Hana said, to President Minseo. Patch me through on the diplomatic channel. General, that's not authorized. Do it anyway. When Minseo's face appeared on the screen, Hana spoke words that would change everything. Madam President, I am General Hana, commander of the Accord Offensive Fleet. I am here to discuss terms of peace. Not surrender. Not victory. Just peace. In the background, she could hear alarms starting to sound. Her own forces were probably reporting her for treason, but she didn't care anymore. Some things were more important than duty. The diplomatic summit was held on a neutral station orbiting a white dwarf star. The location had been chosen carefully. Far from both Accord and human territories, impossible to attack without everyone seeing it coming. President Minseo arrived with a small delegation. General Hana came with Ambassador Day and a handful of advisors. Both leaders had defied significant opposition to attend. Both knew they might be arrested when they returned home. But both were tired of war. They met in a simple conference room, with transparent walls showing the endless void beyond. No guards were present. No weapons were allowed. Just two leaders trying to find a path forward. Thank you for coming, Hana said in careful human English. She had been learning the language. Thank you for calling, Minseo replied in equally careful Vrin. She had been learning too. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. 3,000 years of pain and anger filled the space between them. Where did you even begin to address that? I want to start by saying something, Hana began. Not as a general, not as a representative, but as one person to another. She took a breath. What was done to humanity was evil, unforgivable, and I am sorry. You weren't there, Minseo said. You didn't make those decisions. No, but I benefited from them. I grew up in an accord that was built partly on your suffering. I learned history that erased you. I lived in ignorance while your people struggled to survive. Hana's voice was firm. I may not be personally responsible, but I am responsible for what happens next. Minseo was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. That's more than your council has offered. The council is fractured. Half want to negotiate. Half want to escalate. I can't speak for them anymore. Hana looked Minseo directly in the eyes. But I can speak for myself and the many who feel as I do. We want to make this right. However long it takes. However much it costs. Some things can't be made right, Minseo said softly. My great-grandmother died in the Civil War. She died calling for help that never came. Millions like her. You can't, but you can ensure it never happens again. Hana pulled up a holographic display. Ambassador Day has been working with human historians. They have a proposal. The proposal was radical. Create a joint commission to investigate the quarantine and historical erasure. Open all sealed archives. Let both human and Accord historians examine everything, then publish the findings throughout the galaxy. The Accord has to acknowledge what happened, Mincio said. Officially. Publicly. Not a quiet apology. A full admission of guilt. Agreed. But there's more. Hana pulled up another document. Reparations. Humanitarian aid. Technology sharing. Humanity was set back 3,000 years. We need to help you catch up. We don't want charity. It's not charity. It's justice. And it's self-interest. Hana smiled grimly. A strong humanity is better for the galaxy than a resentful one. Dawn. Dawn run. Dawn run. They negotiated for hours. Every point was fought over. Every word mattered. But slowly, a framework emerged. An agreement that both sides could live with. But then the alarm started. On the tactical display, multiple ships appeared at the edge of the system. Accord military vessels. Moving fast and deploying for combat. Hardliners, Hana breathed. They found out about the meeting. Led by a Keltar admiral named Warren, the fleet had come to stop the peace talks, to arrest Hana for treason and eliminate the human delegation. If negotiations failed, the war could continue. How many ships? Mincio asked calmly. 20. Heavy cruisers and destroyers. We have 10 human ships in range. Can we fight our way out? Hana shook her head. Not against that firepower. They'll destroy the station before we can evacuate. Mincio activated her communicator. Colonel Tae-jin, this is the President. We have hostile forces approaching. Rules of engagement? On the other end, Tae-jin's voice was ice. Madam President, I have been waiting 3,000 years to destroy Keltar ships. Give me the order. Son, I have been waiting. Keltar ships. But Hana interrupted. Wait. There might be another way. She opened a broadcast channel. All Accord ships in this system? This is General Hana. I am ordering you to stand down immediately. These peace talks are legitimate and necessary. Warren's face appeared on the screen. His features were sharp and cruel. You are under arrest for treason, General. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded. I won't do that. Then you'll be destroyed along with the humans. Hana took a breath. Then she did something unprecedented. Attention, all Accord ships. This is General Hana. I am hereby resigning my commission and requesting political asylum with humanity. Mincio's eyes widened. So did Dae's. This wasn't part of the plan. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to go through the human fleet, Hana continued. And if you attack them, you're not maintaining order. You're starting a war crime against people trying to make peace. Warren snarled. You've lost your mind. No. I've found it. Hana stood straighter. I'm Vryn. My people helped condemn humanity to death. The least I can do is stand with them now when others try to finish the job. The broadcast went out across Accord space. Within minutes, it was everywhere. The image of a Vryn general defecting to humanity, choosing honor over nation. The public reaction was immediate and massive. Protests that had been simmering exploded into fury. Not at Hana, but at the hardliners trying to stop peace. Warren's face became a symbol of everything wrong with the old guard, of leaders who would rather fight than admit mistakes. But Warren still had his fleet. And he was moving to attack. That's when Suman's voice came over the general channel. Admiral Warren. This is Commander Suman of the frigate Times Morning Light **. My ship and 5 others are breaking formation. We will not fire on peace negotiators. Mutiny, Warren roared. You'll be executed. Maybe. But we'll die with honor. Suman's ship peeled away from Warren's fleet and moved to join the human defensive line. One by one, other ships followed. Not all of them. But enough. Enough to turn the balance. Warren found himself with only 8 ships under his command, against a combined human and Accord force of 16. This isn't over, he warned. You're all traitors. History will remember you that way. History will remember us as the ones who chose peace, Hana replied. What will it remember you as? Warren's fleet retreated. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. The hardliners wouldn't give up easily. In the wake of the confrontation, the negotiations continued. This time, with Suman and the other defectors present. With live broadcasts, so the whole galaxy could watch. A young human soldier named Kyung-won served as one of the security personnel. He was barely 20, born after the Civil War but carrying its scars anyway. His parents had died in the early raids against the Accord. He watched the Vryn diplomats with wary eyes. Hated them on principle. But then he saw something that changed his perspective. Ambassador Day was speaking about the archives he'd uncovered. About the messages humanity had sent. And as he spoke about human children begging for sanctuary, the old diplomat's voice broke. Ender, Ender, Ender. Tears ran down his face. I read their words, Day whispered. Children writing letters to aliens they'd never met, begging for help. And we did nothing. We let them die. He looked at the human delegation with raw anguish. I am so sorry. I know it means nothing. But I am sorry. Far, 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 far. Kyung-won had expected the Accord representatives to be cold, calculating, unfeeling. But this old alien was crying over the deaths of humans who had been gone for 3,000 years, crying as if they were his own children. Later, during a break, Kyung-won found himself near Day. The diplomat looked exhausted and old. Why do you care? Kyung-won asked bluntly. Why does it matter to you? What happened to us? Day looked at the young human with sad eyes. Because I am a historian. I dedicated my life to preserving memory, and when I learned that an entire species had been erased from history, it broke something in me. He touched his chest. To forget deliberately is to kill twice. Once in body, once in memory. I couldn't let that stand. But we're not your people. No. But you are people. That's enough. Something in Kyung-won's anger cracked. Not broke, but cracked. This alien wasn't his enemy. He was just someone trying to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. The negotiations concluded after 5 days. The Treaty of Hope, as it was called, included several key provisions. Full acknowledgement of the crimes committed against humanity. Public apologies from every species involved in the quarantine vote. Opening of all sealed archives to joint Human Accord investigation. Massive reparations to help humanity rebuild. Humanity's integration into the Celestial Accord as full members. The Accord itself would be reformed, with new governance structures to prevent such abuses in the future. But most importantly, memorials. On Earth, on the Vryn homeworld, on the Keltar homeworld. Monuments to those who died calling for help that never came. Places where both species could remember and mourn together. The treaty was signed by President Min Seo and the reformist faction of the Accord Council. General Hana signed as the first human citizen of Vryn origin, symbolizing the bridge between peoples. But not everyone accepted peace. The hardliners launched one final attempt to sabotage the summit. A team of Keltar commandos infiltrated the station, intent on assassinating the human delegation. They never expected a young human soldier to throw himself in front of General Hana when the shooting started. Kyung-won took 3 rounds meant for the Vryn general. He went down hard, blood spreading across the floor. Colonel Taejin and the security team eliminated the attackers within seconds. But the damage was done. Hana dropped to her knees beside the dying soldier. Why? She asked desperately. Why did you save me? Kyung-won looked up at her with fading eyes. Because Ambassador Day cried for us. Because you gave up everything for peace. Because maybe. He coughed blood. Maybe we can be better than we were. He died with Hana holding his hand, an alien general weeping over a human soldier who had saved her life. The image of that moment went viral across both civilizations. A Vryn mourning a human dying to save a former enemy. It became a symbol more powerful than any words in the treaty. Kyungwon was buried on Earth with full military honors. General Hana attended, despite the risk. So did Ambassador Dae and dozens of Accord representatives who believed in the peace. Colonel Tae-jin stood at the funeral and looked at the coffin draped in Earth's flag. He had prepared a speech about sacrifice and duty. But when the time came, he couldn't deliver it. Instead, he walked to where Hana stood and extended his hand. "I hated you," he said simply. "I hated every one of your species. I wanted to burn your worlds and dance in the ashes." "I know," Hana replied. But Kyungwon didn't. He saw something better. Something I was too angry to see. Taejin's voice was rough. "So I'm going to try. For him. For all the ones we've lost. I'm going to try to be better." They shook hands over Kyungwon's grave. An old human warrior and a Vryn general, choosing hope over hate. The treaty was ratified 3 months later. The vote was close, but it passed. The Accord was formally renamed the Galactic Union, symbolizing a new beginning. Humanity took its seat at the council table, not as conquered people or tolerated guests, but as full members. The same rights as everyone else. The same voice. The first joint human-Vryn school opened on Mars 2 years later. Children of both species learned together, shared history together. They learned about the Civil War and the quarantine, about the pain and the peace, about how easy it is to forget people and how hard it is to remember. On Earth, the Memorial of Silent Stars was completed. It listed every person who had died during the Civil War while calling for help. Millions of names carved in stone, lit by eternal flames. Accord visitors came by the thousands, many leaving flowers or written apologies. On the Vryn homeworld, a mirror memorial was built. It honored those who had fought against the quarantine, those who had voted no, those who had tried to remember when others chose to forget. It was smaller, but just as important. Ambassador Dae lived to see both memorials completed. He died peacefully at age 142, surrounded by both Vryn and human friends. His last words were, "They remember now." That's enough. General Hana retired from military service and became an advocate for refugee rights across the galaxy. She spent her life ensuring that no species would ever be abandoned again. When she died, humans and Vryn mourned together. Colonel Tae-jin never fully let go of his anger, but he channeled it into something better. He became a teacher at the first Joint Military Academy, training both human and Accord officers in the arts of war and peace. His lessons always included one story. The story of Kyungwon, who died believing that yesterday's enemies could become tomorrow's friends. President Min Seo served 3 terms before retiring. She witnessed humanity's return to the galaxy, saw human colonies spreading through space again, saw mixed crews of humans and aliens working together. Her last public speech was simple. "We were forgotten, but we survived. We were erased, but we returned. We were abandoned, but we forgave." That is humanity's true strength, not our rage, but our hope. 20 years after the Treaty of Hope, the first child was born to a human mother and Vryn father. Her name was Jiwon, and she became a symbol of everything the peace had achieved. She grew up learning both languages, celebrating both cultures, belonging to both peoples. When asked which species she belonged to, she always gave the same answer. "I belong to the future." The galaxy had believed humans were myths, stories to frighten children, cautionary tales about species that destroy themselves. But humanity wasn't a myth. They were survivors. They were warriors when they needed to be. They were forgivers when they chose to be. And when they raged into battle, they didn't bring just fire and fury. They brought a mirror, forcing the galaxy to look at what it had done, to remember what it had forgotten, to acknowledge the truth, no matter how painful. The Accord had tried to erase one species. Instead, they taught the galaxy a different lesson. Some things cannot be forgotten. Some people will not be erased. And rage, properly directed, can burn away lies and reveal truth. Humanity came home, not as conquerors, not as victims. They came home as themselves, flawed and fierce, angry and forgiving, deadly and kind. They came home, and the galaxy was better for it.